Hey guys, welcome back to What's a Woolpert. Today we got Zach Schumann on the horn. We're going to be talking about advanced air mobility.
It's exciting. What's a Woolpert? It's advanced air mobility.
Perfect. As Zach said, welcome back to What's a Woolpert. We're talking about advanced air mobility, or AAM. I am Dan Michalik, as always, and then Ben Blumenscheid is with us as well. And we're excited to have Zach here. But before we get into it too much, Zach, can you please tell us what you do and where you're at?
I am in Denver, Colorado. And what I do, I'm our national sales practice leader in our aviation market. But I have the pleasure of leading up a lot of our initiatives around advanced air mobility. So I get to work with the cool, crazy, fun, innovative part of aviation that is allegedly creating what most people would call flying cars, but they're electric vertical aircraft. And we are doing a lot of infrastructure work and a lot of really cool stuff that we'll talk about. So I get the great pleasure of leading an amazing team to do that.
Okay. So just for starters, I have a couple of lightning round things. But before doing that, to set the context, for a lay person, a person that doesn't know, could you easily sum up in 2 to 3 sentences what advanced air mobility is?
I won't use the official boring definition, but
Okay.
advanced air mobility, it's a new age transportation system that's going to have largely electric, but not exclusively electric, vehicles that take off vertically but fly like a plane, that can connect you between cities, around cities. It's basically a good one sentence. It's allowing you to use aviation where you traditionally couldn't. So if I wanted to go to the Denver airport from our Denver office, I could look to advanced air mobility to get me there in the future versus taking an Uber, driving, taking the light rail. And I could do it in probably from here 10 minutes or so, compared to what could be a 45-minute to an hour drive.
So this is exclusively unmanned,
No,
or is it manned as well?
no, it is crewed and uncrewed. So we're talking, a big mixture of things. But we're talking there's fully autonomous systems. So there's a company named Whisk that's owned by Boeing, and they're building a kind of bright yellow, looks like a traditional taxi cab, autonomous flying vehicle. But there's also companies that are building piloted, crewed. It's basically a helicopter that it has some efficiency gain. It's electric. It's a lot quieter, and it could take off with a lot higher performance.
So Ben, I think you brought this up the other day. I think it was you. There's a lot of terms people throw around here. Is
Aviation
eVTOL? But is eVTOL the most accurate? Because you've got, and I don't remember. I think Ben, you had a list. You had drones. You have VTOLs. You have. I thought they had a CTOL.
Yeah.
So, what's the appropriate terminology?
In aviation, you could throw any letter in front of it, in front of a smattering of other letters, and you probably have a proper term. But no, eVTOL is the term most synonymous with advanced air mobility. It's electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft.
So that's where AAM is probably focused on a lot of stuff. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, the thing I said the other day was if you had to speculate, what would be the term for it when it hits the mainstream and people are taking eVTOLs, to the airport? What do you think they're going to call it?
What's the slick thing that they're going to call it on the social media? Probably just a plane. It's a form of an airplane, but in actuality, I could see him. I think air taxi is picking up a lot of steam, and it's always picked up a lot of steam when we're talking about passenger transport. I'm going to take an air taxi there. That's cool. I don't think anyone's going to refer to the exact rotor propulsion mechanism as to what aircraft they're flying on.
Maybe they'll just be called drones. It'll be enough.
Yeah.
Enough people using them, they'll just refer to them as drones. I don't know.
I figure somebody would have used the term Jetson or something, since that was.
It's all. There are more conferences where the Jetsons are talked about today than.
You're probably sick of it.
If you go to a conference and someone does not get up and refer to this is the Jetsons, you're missing out.
Well, you're welcome. I checked that box for you.
Yeah, you check the box with the podcast. It's the Jetsons, folks.
So, but to be clear, and usually like I can't speak for Ben, but we collectively kind of look at the material out there to kind of get a little familiar with it. So far, what you've said, this is driven by people movement, mostly, not product movement. So people are more focused around moving people, not like I'm Amazon and I want to fire all my truck drivers and just let drones do this stuff.
Well, there's definitely so a good distinction here, and like this is an important point for advanced air mobility, and I think also where like Woolpert and planning firms, firms that have planning capabilities, talk about this a lot. There's a big distinction between advanced air mobility and like last mile package delivery.
Okay.
So when people think about like, Amazon's going to bring me a cupcake, or some fun thing, and they're going to drop it on my lawn, that is happening. I mean, there are last mile drone delivery companies that is doing those things. There is some very distinct like policy and infrastructure and economic conditions that differentiate that from advanced air mobility, which how most people think of it as, moving people between one point, in a city to another, or moving them completely between different cities and regions. That's regional air mobility. There is cargo, but it's not a cargo is going to be delivered to your house.
Not the last mile stuff. It's completely different discussions.
It's middle mile. You're going to move 1,500 pounds from one facility to another for efficiency, probably with your high priority first class type packages.
So then you're basically saying when you're talking about AAM, it is the people, maybe some cargo, but if you talk about now having people in the air with an unmanned, craft navigating space they've never navigated before, minus maybe takeoff and landing or something like that, that's where your efforts are focused, or the industry's efforts are focused for AAM.
Yeah, I mean, it's a new world of like a proliferation of landing sites, this increase of potentially autonomous, but either way, this increase of aircraft in the low altitude environment, which constantly changes. People are putting up buildings, putting up cranes. Like the low altitude environment in cities and in this country is constantly evolving. And then you have aircraft that need to talk to each other to ensure, obviously, there's not a mid-air collision, aside from all the other fun stuff about where do you site these things, how do you not negatively impact one community versus another, how do you not create noise over people's homes that they don't want to hear. So it's challenge galore, but opportunity abound.
And I think it might have been something that you had in a press release or an article, but it talked about this idea of any solution should be a mix of policy, probably data standardization and maintenance, and then maybe some sort of resource allocation and legislation. Like where is the industry focused? Is it more on having the data so they can understand these things are constrained, they're not going to hit stuff, or is it more just people following certain rules, so it's not data driven but rule driven? Like how are they trying to solve this problem more specifically?
Yeah, well, this is where we're going to avoid a rabbit hole. What's a Woolpert is avoiding rabbit holes for this podcast.
That's cool.
No, so I mean, the typical person with a political science degree, it depends, but truly, I mean, the industry is in two very different places. So there's on the public federal guidance and statewide guidance that is really looking at, okay, how do we appropriately plan for these things? How do we not limit or restrict private investment from actually allowing this to be successful? And then there's private industry who's like, okay, we're full on research and development mode. This is a whole new propulsion mechanism. This is electrification. This is sustainability. This is, I mean, all the buzzwords you could think of, advanced air mobility can bring in. And so, you have industry that's really pushing it from an R&D side and starting to from an implementation side. They need rules. And then you have the federal government and the state government and local governments and airports who are looking for data to make the rules. It's the chicken and egg scenario. And that's kind of where we're sitting. Like my team is sitting, is we're supporting some folks on the private side, and we're like actively working on the development of that data and the concepts around that data, and then working on the public side of collecting that data and turning them into rules. And so we have projects with the FAA, we have projects with private industry, and we're kind of mixing that together to, I think, hopefully come up with pretty unique solution for advanced air mobility.
So we noticed too. There's a lot of big players out there. You just said FAA, NASA has stuff out there.
Yep.
USDOT had stuff out there, and I think it was the FAA. And again, I'm just talking buzzwords here for the most part. What did they call it? I forgot. Oh my gosh, there it is. FAA's Innovate 28. So
Yep.
claiming that this is going to be good to go in 28. I mean, yes,
Yeah.
no.
Well, there's a website, the AAM Reality Index. I mean, and they track all the companies and their progress. I mean, a lot of companies are saying 2025 for certification
Okay.
and entry into service. I mean, the 2028, which is tied to the Olympics in the United States, and so I mean, that's when I think we could I think that's a more realistic timeline for actual like true operations. But we will likely have certified aircraft by 2025. Probably, we'll realistically say 2026 to be conservative here. And yeah, I mean, that's to think we're here at the end of 23 and we're pretty close to having electric flying cars, as some people will call them, certified by the FAA is pretty impressive. There's a lot of work that has to be done after that, but it's an incredible achievement because I mean a lot of these companies started their work 5 years ago or less, and it is not a small feat to get an aircraft certified in this country or in the world.
Yeah, it's like you almost want to, since this is being recorded, like take bets. Like Zach will be in one of these things in the year 2027.
Yeah. Well,
You know what I mean?
I've had the benefit of seeing some of them fly because I mean
Okay.
the full scale prototypes, and I mean it's amazing to see them fly and to hear them and to see them operate, and um, it's like it's so real now that these things are actually in the air, and some are in the air with people in them. Fortunately, not me, but maybe fortunately for some of the companies, but unfortunately for my own edification.
Well, they said supposedly your odds of a fatality in a car are 1 in 5,000. Your odds of fatality in a manned aircraft, like traditional airplane, not with eVTOL or whatever, is 1 in 11 million.
Yeah.
So where does this fit in the middle? Any idea?
We these things are not going to be certified, I think, any less safe or stringently than we certify regular aircraft. And
Okay.
so I think we've done ACRP work, we've done a lot of work. I mean, I think across the board, autonomy, there's definitely some drawbacks and challenges, and there's significant investment that needs to happen to really enable autonomy successfully. But autonomy, in a lot of cases, can do as well, if not better, in certain circumstances as a human on board.
But you got to understand that's probably I'm not talking me personally, but I'm just saying humans is probably a pretty big hurdle to say there's a pilot even asleep at the wheel and everybody's doing it's doing everything and the guy's just reading a book. But when stuff goes down, that guy can do whatever you know what I mean. That's a big hurdle for society to get over.
It's a big thing for people to get over, and again, aviation is unique. Like think about it like this: most people will get in a car regardless of what brand it is.
Sure.
They don't know about how that. I mean, they'll look at safety ratings maybe when they're buying a car, but they're getting into an Uber or a taxi. I mean, they're not looking at the safety ratings. They're just counting on that car to function, and they're accepting that risk. In aviation, because of some notable accidents, there's still, and the fact that you're not on the ground, you can't just pull over and stop or get out.
Mm-hmm.
The way the brain works is they associate more fear and risk with aviation, even if that's not truly the case.
Sure.
And so the way we've built it is in America, but really across the world. I mean, we have some 121, which is when we call 121 carriers. I mean, those are your scheduled airlines. I mean, that's like your Uniteds, your Deltas, your American, Southwest. I mean, we associate those companies, even though they don't make the aircraft, but we associate those companies with safety. People feel a lot safer if they're boarding a Delta jet than if they were boarding like an unmarked small plane taking off from some random general aviation airport. The people in those communities know that is safe, and the pilot, if the pilot is certified and making smart, safe decisions and is a rational actor, then they're safe. But I think a big part of this being successful is those types of companies, like a Delta or those 121 carriers, being behind advanced air mobility and painting that flag on the tail. And a lot of people say like, you know, a regular human passenger eye goes to the tail when you're talking about aviation. They look at what airline is flying that airplane. And so if an eVTOL, if I jumped on an app and I said, oh, I'm taking a Delta jet, for instance, to the Denver airport, you'd feel a lot more comfortable than if you were taking some random you don't know what airplane, because you're going to assume that it's safe because of 121 operation. And we're seeing a lot of those airlines invest heavily in AAM. So like Delta has a partnership with a company, United has put in orders, American Airlines has put in orders. So those carriers are doing it, and that's why I think people are actually going to the people are going to more quickly than we expect get over some of that hump of being afraid to get on these things.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about the big players being involved. You know, I didn't really know if they would be trying to fight it because they want to charge a bunch of money to get you through this hub to that hub to get you somewhere. But I guess you're just saying it probably expands their reach better.
I mean, if I could not have to drive my car and wait in traffic and find a parking spot near the airport, if I'm an airline, I love the opportunity. And at first, it's going to be a high dollar first class passenger type add on. But if I'm an airline, I love the idea of being able to offer that passenger. I'm not going to end their journey when they get to the airport they land at. They're going to continue, and I'm going to replace the Uber. That airline's going to keep making revenue and keep that person in their business system until they get closer to the final destination.
Interesting. Ben, I'm sorry. I think I talked on you. Were you going to say something?
Well, I had a question, about just the data for that is required to navigate that airspace, and we kind of talked about this a little bit. With Dr. Qasim was saying that the challenge with autonomous ground vehicles is particularly internationally is that the data standard needs to match, and when you're going across borders, the car needs to be able to pick up the information that's on the other side. So the notion here was that some of I don't know, maybe because of the nature of flying, you don't have the same types of curb. Like this, is there a lot of granular data like that, or is there less?
There needs to be. So I've written an article about this, and this is like a hot topic of conversation because we're all geospatial nerds. But Qasim is right. I mean, for autonomy to work, like it's predicated on having a good base layer of data. Like all these, like same thing with a self-driving car, an autonomous airplane. Like it will have some sense of onboard collision system. Like there will be some sort of camera system on them. But you want that to be a redundancy. You want to know and be able to expect and predict where those hazards are going to be. And like I said, similar to a road, how construction, I mean, there's people constantly running into a road. There's all sorts of things. I mean, the air changes just like that. I mean, cranes are going up, people are moving. And so the FAA maintains an obstacle database. It's standard, there's standard data practices across the country. That database is not robust right now. It's not robust in an urban environment. Typically planes aren't flying around 400 feet. And you have a lot of buildings and obstructions around 400 feet. That's kind of that limit where small UAS is under 400 feet. I think a lot of people are expecting these AAM aircraft to operate somewhere above 400 feet to about that 1,200 to 1,500 feet mark. But they can be landing at vertiports in urban areas, near transit stations and all these places where you don't see planes landing. And so because of that, we have to really rethink how we collect this data because we don't have enough. And you also have to make sure that data is equitable because the last thing you don't want two conflicting data sets going to two different operators. And so their flight paths are different, which means that the community impacts are different, which also means that it makes it harder from an air traffic perspective because you have aircraft who think they have to go around in certain ways different objects that might be conflicting with each other. So you have to have like a singular, uniform, equitable data set that anyone who wants to fly can access and know, oh, there's a temporary crane that's blocking my entrance pathway to this vertiport. I shouldn't go there to land.
So, I mean, then for this to work, you'd have to have it centrally managed by the FAA to
Yeah, so they manage it now, and
okay.
it certainly needs to get a lot more robust, and it certainly needs to get probably down. I mean, I think lidar is a great tool for that, but you need some high density lidar to get down to the light poles, power lines. I mean, all the things that could cause a major issue. You don't want to hit. Um, you want to have that data. So that's one thing that is still a big inhibitor, because a pilot, when there's a pilot on board, they can see and avoid, which is the FAA term for visual flight rules. They're using their eyes to avoid objects in the sky and avoid other aircraft flying. Um, it's putting a lot of trust in computer systems to do that for us.
What about another aspect of it? Since there's humans in there, are you going to have the FAA screening people before they get on?
Oh, that's the TSA.
Or TSA? Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, it's everyone's favorite group. The TSA. That's a big question mark. It's $1 million question. There's definitely going to have to be some level of screening. Post 9/11 in this country, we take that very seriously. Whether the onus falls on actual TSA agents or it's somewhat of a privatized market, given the proliferation of sites that it can land on, is one thing. Whether you need to be screened if you're not going to a major airport is another question. And there's certainly some folks who they want the efficiency gain. Okay, I'm going to be pre-screened at one location and then I'm going to fly to an airport to avoid the TSA line at the airport. Mm-hmm. And that's a great thought, but that means you need to have the same level of screening ability that the airport does somewhere else. And so, I mean, that's a big hurdle, and I think that's why we're starting to see infrastructure developers developing these agnostic, larger facilities where you can land and take off, where you can, one, mitigate impacts a little bit more. You have a little bit more space to standardize the takeoff and landing area amongst different types of eVTOLs, and you also will have space for TSA screening.
So you'd have like a little hub, even like a small regional airport, but it would be for these things.
Yeah. Okay. And the great thing about that is because these things can take off and land vertically, you need right now probably like 100 feet by 100 feet of concrete, of load-bearing surface, compared to a 1 to 2 mile long runway that you see at most airports.
Yeah. So I was going to ask, do vertiports actually exist here in the U.S.?
The U.S. does have some vertiports
that are actually functional for this kind of stuff, or are they more R&D?
No, that we have fully functional vertiports. We have a few public vertiports. We have a lot of heliports in this country. Most heliports, though, are private. Yeah. And a lot of heliports in this country are not in desirable places for people to fly in. Most people don't want to go through a hospital to get on their eVTOL air taxi. Hopefully, you're not going to the hospital. We have heliports that definitely will be converted. We have new greenfield sites that will be developed. But we have, I believe, and don't quote me on this, I think we have 2 vertiports or 2 pieces of infrastructure that are called vertiports. Whether they meet the vertiport standard is a different story. But 2 pieces of infrastructure in the country that are called vertiports, and there's companies actively leasing and breaking ground to build vertiports for this new advanced air mobility operation.
Are other portions of the world more advanced on that front, or not more advanced, but more ahead of the curve because maybe they're not as litigious as we are?
I don't think so. I think the U.S. There was just a readiness study that was released that shows the U.S. was number one. I think that's pretty accurate. There's a lot of companies dabbling in advanced air mobility. There's other test vertiports from research purposes or test beds that have been developed across the world. There's been a lot of publicity around the Olympics in 2024 in Paris that there is a company that will like to operate some level, even if it's a very low tempo eVTOL operations during the Olympics to kind of show off this new form of mobility. And so there's infrastructure being supported there. But I think the U.S. is doing a pretty good job and a pretty good job partnering. The U.S. is in pretty good conversation with the UK Aviation Authority, EASA, which is Europe, Australia, Brazil, and everyone is pulling their weight to make this thing a reality in 3 years.
So this has been good discussion. We always like to hear though, like what's up and coming. Like what do you have in terms of maybe a client project, a conference, a paper, a new technology launching that you're excited about that you want to share with clients and coworkers?
I think, I mean, in general, the most exciting thing we do, which a lot of people in the industry know, and we support the FAA's research for this. So we support the research that goes behind the infrastructure requirements for the AAM, and we are getting the opportunity to conduct operational testing with a lot of these companies. So we're going out with the aircraft.
That's cool.
We're putting sensors around the aircraft to understand the way the aircraft interacts with the ground, the impacts on the ground, the impacts on the aircraft. So it's really great because our research is going to support developing performance-based standards, which really has never been done. I mean, this is like the first time we're going to see performance-based standards being developed through operational testing with experimental aircraft. And so we've already gotten to do some. We're continuing it. It's amazing. Like we're so lucky that we get to be a part of this, and the fact that we're getting to learn all this about these aircraft and be out there with the aircraft and these really innovative companies doing it. So like, I mean, that blows anything I've ever done in my career out to go see some of these aircraft fly and travel around. But I mean, we're also doing, like, we're supporting some state DOTs, and it's amazing because like we're right at the precipice of advanced air mobility is coming into this electrification conversation. So as all these people are starting to talk about how do we prepare for all these Teslas and how do we prepare for all these electric surface vehicles, while also, hey, like there's also going to be aerial vehicles that need to be electrified, and how does that impact the community? How does that change the way the community interacts with aviation? I mean, we know a lot of people, the biggest way communities interact with aviation now, if they're not using it, it's they're complaining about noise. That's kind of the biggest community impact aviation has on noise. And so prepping communities and how do communities prepare for that? How do we build equitable infrastructure that doesn't negatively impact disadvantaged communities that don't have as loud of a voice on the noise conversation? So we're working in a number of states, Florida, Georgia, Virginia, Alaska, California, all sorts of states that we're working in. So both in each of those states, we're working sometimes with the DOT, sometimes with airports, sometimes with local municipalities. So it's awesome because and for my team, we're working with these aircraft OEMs, and we're working on big research projects. And we're working on planning projects with local communities and getting out into communities and talking to people about the way they interact with aviation and how it can be better, how they can use AAM to make their lives, if anything, slightly easier or less time consuming to commute. So it's really cool. And I think we're right at the precipice where a lot of these companies are willing to show their aircraft off flying. So there's tons of YouTube videos that have already shown these aircraft flying, but I think they're starting to really get out and go to conferences and go to communities and show off these really quiet electric aircraft just flying around in the skies that are taking off from right in front of you. It's wild. It makes it real.
Yeah. And I mean, I think, so it's like you heard it here first, right? You're able to work with not only the government clients, but you also are working with the private industry clients that are creating these devices. And you're basically saying 2025, right? So 2 years.
Yeah, a couple of years, 25, 26, I think we'll see some form of certified aircraft, and we'll see. It's crazy that I've been working on this for 5-6 years. I mean, we've been working on, we're at the time when some people are ready to plan for it, but I mean, it's coming. Like if you asked me 5 or 6 years ago, I'd be like, yeah, it'll come eventually. And to think now we have a date and there's aircraft flying around, it's crazy.
Wow. Maybe after this meeting, we should all go to our Outlook calendar, go 3 years out, say Zach may have been in a autonomous eVTOL flying around.
We'll regroup. And the good thing about that is, and the people don't even know this because they weren't listening at the beginning, the tree's going to look exactly the same.
Because it's not a real tree. Secret. Cool. I mean, Ben, Zach, anything else you guys think we should hit upon?
No. I think from the question of what's a Woolpert, Woolpert's a company that works on cool stuff.
Yeah. I mean, Ben knows, but we've talked about using walnuts for athletic fields. We've talked about using, legislation for water rights. We've talked about how do we get our educational system funded correctly. And now we're talking about George Jetson, right? Because I feel like now that every time I see you, Zach, I'm just going to bring up the Jetsons because
I'm telling you,
rubs you the wrong way.
For most conversations at AAM, you used the word Jetson, not a.
They're going to be like, get this guy out of here. Give him the hook. It's always interesting to talk to an SME on a subject and hear what we're pushing in the industry. So we definitely appreciate your time, and we'll look for you in the clouds.
We'll see you there.
All right, man. Thanks.
Thank you all for having me.